The captain's like, bad luck. Like, what are you going to do? I said, it'll get better. He said, no. Because it was swollen like that.
For years, Sig Hansen has stood at the helm of the F V Northwestern like a man carved out of the sea itself, unyielding, controlled, and seemingly immune to the chaos that defines life on Deadliest Catch. Decades in the Bering Sea, where waves rise like walls and mistakes can turn fatal in seconds, built him into something more than a captain. They made him disciplined, fearless, and almost untouchable. Viewers watched him outlast storms, survive close calls, and command respect without hesitation. But reputations like that don't just form on camera. Beyond the edited footage and high-stakes heroics lies a far more complicated reality. There are now rumors that what they found in Sig Hansen's boat is truly shocking. But the real story begins over 3 decades ago. The shocking 1990 allegations. The story does not begin in the roaring winds of the Bering Sea. It does not begin with cameras rolling or crab pots slamming against steel decks. It begins quietly, decades earlier, long before Sig Hansen became one of the most recognizable faces on Deadliest Catch. Back then, there were no audiences watching his every move, no mythology built around his endurance. There was only a private life. And it was within this setting, around 1990, during a custody dispute following a separation, that allegations of abuse were made by Hansen's young daughter. Custody battles are often legally and emotionally volatile, and in this case, the claims escalated immediately into a criminal matter. Law enforcement became involved. Hansen was arrested. That single arrest would go on to haunt the man forever. Around 1990, Hansen's marriage to his first wife, June Hansen, had reached a breaking point. Hansen was deeply embedded in the commercial fishing industry, spending long stretches at sea aboard the F V Northwestern, often away for weeks at a time during peak seasons. That kind of lifestyle, while financially rewarding, is notoriously difficult on families. Absence, pressure, and the unpredictability of the job can create fractures that grow over time. The divorce was initiated amid a serious marital breakdown, with disputes centering around custody and the well-being of their children. As is common in contested divorces, especially those involving young children, the situation quickly escalated beyond simple separation into a custody battle, a legal process where both sides present claims, concerns, and at times, allegations intended to influence the court's decision on parental rights. It was within this volatile environment that the most serious claims emerged. After the arrest, prosecutors reviewed the case. They examined the available testimony, any physical evidence, and the surrounding circumstances. However, they declined to file criminal charges, citing insufficient evidence. In practical terms, that means the case did not meet the standard required to proceed to trial, where guilt would have to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. 2 years later, in 1992, the matter reached another formal checkpoint in family court. The court reviewed the allegations within the context of custody and parental rights. The outcome was clear in legal language. The court did not find proof of abuse. Again, the phrasing is precise. At that point, legally, the case had reached its conclusion. No criminal charges, no judicial finding of abuse. For years, it remained there. As the new century dawned, Hansen's life took a dramatically different trajectory. He became a central figure in one of television's most successful reality series. Beginning in 2005, Deadliest Catch documented the high-risk world of Alaskan crab fishing, particularly in the Bering Sea. This is an environment known for freezing temperatures, waves exceeding 30 feet, and one of the highest fatality rates of any U.S. occupation. Hansen, as captain of the Northwestern, quickly became a defining presence. His leadership style was strict, his decisions often immediate and unforgiving. Over time, that image solidified into something larger, a symbol of resilience under extreme pressure. By the 2010s, Hansen was not just a fisherman. He was a public figure with global recognition. Viewers had seen him survive mechanical failures, brutal storms, and even a heart attack in 2016 that occurred during filming. But while that narrative played out on screen, the earlier chapter of his life remained largely out of public focus, until it returned. In 2016, more than 2 decades after the original allegations, Hansen's daughter filed a civil lawsuit repeating those claims. But there is one important detail here. This was not a criminal case. Civil cases operate under a different burden of proof, preponderance of evidence, rather than beyond a reasonable doubt. The objective is not criminal conviction, but liability, accountability, and often financial damages. The filing itself immediately drew attention. Media outlets began revisiting the early 1990s case. Details that had once been confined to court records were now part of public reporting. For many viewers, this was the first time they encountered this aspect of Hansen's history. Naturally, Hansen responded by denying all allegations, maintaining the same position he had held since the beginning. He pointed to the earlier outcomes, the decision not to file charges, and the 1992 court findings as evidence supporting his stance. From his perspective, the issue had already been investigated and resolved, but the legal system does not always treat past conclusions as final barriers, especially in civil litigation. The 2016 lawsuit entered a complex legal phase. Questions of jurisdiction arose. Statutes of limitation, laws that set time limits on filing cases, became central. In cases involving allegations from decades earlier, these procedural elements often determine whether a case can proceed at all. The case moved through appeals. At various points, courts allowed portions of the lawsuit to continue. That fact alone sustained its presence in the public sphere. It meant the claims were still being considered within the legal system, even if no final judgment had yet been reached. And with each development, the past refused to recede. Media coverage intensified during this period. Reports carefully laid out the timeline. Allegations in 1990. Arrest, no charges filed. 1992 court ruling. 2016 civil lawsuit, ongoing appeals. Each detail became part of a narrative that was both factual and unresolved. For Hansen, the stakes were high. His career, built over decades, was tied to his public image. Deadliest Catch was not just a television show. It was a long-running series with millions of viewers, a cornerstone of the Discovery Channel lineup. Any controversy involving one of its central figures carried implications beyond the individual. At the same time, the nature of reality television adds another layer. Audiences feel a sense of familiarity with such figures. As the legal process continued, the emotional dimension of the case became more visible. Civil litigation, particularly involving allegations of this nature, is rarely quick or simple. It involves repeated revisiting of claims, responses, and evidence. It extends timelines. It keeps the issue active. As years passed, Hansen continued his work on Deadliest Catch, maintaining his role as captain and central figure. The show itself remained focused on the dangers of commercial fishing, the unpredictable storms, the mechanical failures, and the constant risk. In that environment, clarity is immediate. Decisions have visible consequences. Survival depends on action. Off-screen, the situation is far less clear. Legal documents, court decisions, and public statements replace the directness of action with layers of complexity. There are no dramatic resolutions, no single moment where everything becomes certain. Instead, there is persistence. The persistence of a case that began in 1990 and resurfaced in 2016. To make matters worse, the case does not offer a conclusion that satisfies every perspective. It offers documented facts, an arrest, a prosecutorial decision not to file charges, a court ruling without proof of abuse, a civil lawsuit filed decades later, legal proceedings that continued through appeals. and consistent denials from Hansen. What it does not offer is finality in the way many expect. That absence is what keeps the story alive. The past, however, refused to leave Sig Hansen alone. Troubles came once again to haunt him again a year later. The 2017 assault incident. By 2017, Hansen was already a veteran television figure, a central personality on Deadliest Catch, which had been running for over a decade since its debut in 2005. He was known to millions. The show had turned commercial crab fishing into something cinematic, dangerous, and deeply personal. But in March 2017 in Seattle, Washington, Hansen became involved in an altercation with an Uber driver. According to police reports and later court proceedings, the situation escalated during or immediately after the ride. Details from the case indicate that Hansen was accused of kicking the driver and spitting on him during the confrontation. The incident was not treated as a minor disagreement. It crossed into criminal territory almost immediately. Law enforcement became involved, and Hansen was charged with fourth-degree assault, a misdemeanor under Washington state law. Fourth-degree assault is broadly defined. It can include any intentional physical contact that is harmful or offensive, even if it does not result in serious injury. It is often the charge applied in cases where there is physical aggression but no severe bodily harm. Still, the significance here was not the level of the charge. It was the fact that it existed at all. Because, unlike past controversies tied to allegations or civil disputes, this case moved directly through the criminal justice system with clear documentation. There were reports, statements, and eventually a courtroom outcome that would not rely on interpretation or unresolved questions. Hansen did not take the case to trial. Instead, he entered a guilty plea to a lesser charge of fourth-degree assault. That decision is often strategic in the legal system. Pleading guilty can avoid a prolonged trial, reduce potential penalties, and bring the matter to a quicker resolution. But it also means accepting legal responsibility for the charge. With that plea, the case reached its conclusion. The court sentenced Hansen to a suspended sentence, meaning he would not serve jail time as long as he complied with the conditions set by the court. He was also required to pay fines and comply with any additional terms imposed, which in similar cases can include probation or behavioral conditions. However, the contrast with his public image was immediate. On Deadliest Catch, Hansen was portrayed as a figure of authority, someone who made difficult decisions under pressure, often for the safety of his crew. His environment was one of controlled chaos, where discipline and hierarchy were essential. That image did not easily align with a street-level altercation involving an Uber driver. The media response reflected that tension. News outlets reported the incident with clear, factual language. A television personality, known for commanding a vessel in one of the world's most dangerous professions, had been charged with assault in a civilian setting. The details were stark, almost mundane. They carried weight precisely because of who was involved. For viewers, it was a shift in perspective. Reputationally, the impact lingered, but the man's troubles were far from over. Trouble on deck, what they found in Sig Hansen's boat. Out in the Bering Sea, things don't go wrong slowly. They break, rupture, and bleed, and they do so very fast. Steel groans, waves hit like moving walls, and decisions are made in seconds, not minutes. For Sig Hansen, captain of the F V Northwestern, that environment was his proving ground. For decades, his reputation was built on surviving it. But in the years following one particular incident aboard his vessel, the focus shifted, not to storms or catch totals, to something far more difficult to navigate. What happens when a decision at sea turns into a legal battle on land? The incident centers on a man named Nick Mavar Jr., a longtime deckhand and familiar face to viewers of Deadliest Catch. Mavar wasn't a newcomer. He had spent years working in one of the most dangerous industries in the United States, commercial fishing, where fatality rates have historically been among the highest of any occupation. According to U.S. labor statistics, commercial fishing has recorded fatality rates often exceeding 100 deaths per 100,000 workers annually in certain years, a number that dwarfs most other professions. Risk is not an exception out there. It is the baseline. And yet, even in an industry defined by danger, there are lines between unavoidable risk and preventable harm, between bad luck and questionable judgment. It is within that space that Mavar's lawsuit would take shape. In March 2016, during a crab fishing trip in the Bering Sea aboard the F V Northwestern, Mavar developed a serious medical condition, later described in legal filings as a groin infection. At first, like many injuries or illnesses on fishing vessels, it may not have appeared immediately life-threatening, but over time, the condition progressively worsened. The critical issue in the case is not the onset of the illness, which is undisputed, but the timeline of the response. According to Mavar's claims, he was not evacuated or provided advanced medical treatment quickly enough, and he remained on board while his condition deteriorated. Commercial fishing vessels in the Bering Sea often operate hundreds of miles from shore, and immediate evacuation is not always possible, but the lawsuit argues that in this case, earlier intervention was feasible and should have occurred. As his condition worsened, Mavar was eventually removed from the vessel and transported for medical care. By that point, however, the infection had reportedly become severe. He required hospitalization and surgery, and the complications were significant enough to have long-term health consequences, affecting his ability to continue working in a physically demanding environment like commercial fishing. In 2017, Mavar filed a civil lawsuit in the United States seeking damages exceeding $1 million. The claim was based on negligence, specifically alleging that those responsible for operations aboard the vessel failed in their duty of care by delaying necessary medical treatment. The lawsuit named parties connected to both the vessel and the production environment, since the trip was being filmed for the Discovery Channel. The defense position in such cases typically centers on the realities of maritime operations, including distance from medical facilities, weather conditions, and the captain's responsibility to balance crew safety with vessel stability. The legal question is not simply whether the condition worsened, but whether the actions taken were reasonable. It all comes down to responsibility. Who was accountable for the delay in medical care? Was it the captain, Hansen himself, responsible for decisions made aboard the vessel? Was it the vessel's ownership and operational structure? Or was it the production environment created by a reality television show where filming schedules, catch quotas, and narrative pressure might influence timing and decisions? The lawsuit pulled all of these elements into focus because, unlike a typical workplace, the Northwestern during filming operates in a hybrid space, part commercial fishing vessel, part television set. Cameras are rolling, producers are involved. The season has deadlines. And while safety protocols exist, the environment is still governed by the realities of the sea, where immediate evacuation is not always possible, and medical facilities are hours, sometimes days, away. Mavar's claim cut directly into that complexity. It suggested that the delay in seeking or providing adequate medical care was not just an unfortunate consequence of being at sea, but a decision, one that could have been handled differently. From Hansen's perspective and from the broader defense, the situation was more nuanced. Maritime operations often involve judgment calls under pressure. Weather conditions, vessel stability, location, and available resources all factor into decisions about whether to continue operations or divert for medical assistance. In many cases, what appears as a delay may be influenced by logistical constraints that are not immediately visible from the outside. But that is exactly what the legal system exists to examine. As the case moved forward, it became part of a broader pattern of scrutiny, not just of Hansen as an individual, but of the culture surrounding commercial fishing and its portrayal on television. Because one of the most persistent themes in Deadliest Catch is risk. It is the show's core identity. The danger is real, The stakes are high and the margin for error is thin. And Hansen himself has acknowledged that reality in unusually candid terms. In interviews, he has admitted that ego and financial pressure can influence decisions at sea. Those are not abstract concepts. Ego can mean pushing through a storm to complete a haul. Financial pressure can mean staying out longer to maximize catch during a short, high-stakes season. In the Alaskan crab fishery, seasons can last only a few weeks, with quotas worth millions of dollars. Every lost day can translate into significant financial loss, not just for the captain, but for the entire crew. That pressure is constant, and it shapes behavior. On one level, it is what makes the industry function. Without that drive, the risks might outweigh the rewards entirely. But on another level, it raises difficult questions. At what point does pushing forward become pushing too far? When does determination cross into recklessness? Mavar's lawsuit forced these questions into a legal framework where decisions are measured not by tradition or expectation, but by standards of care and responsibility. The dispute also highlighted the layered nature of accountability in modern commercial fishing. The Northwestern is not just a vessel. It is part of a larger operation involving ownership structures, insurance, and media production. The involvement of the Discovery Channel added another dimension. While the network does not control vessel operations directly, its presence influences the environment. Filming schedules, narrative arcs, and the demands of producing a long-running series create pressures that do not exist on a standard fishing boat. That overlap became part of the broader discussion surrounding the case. Deadliest Catch has always framed injuries and near misses as part of the job. A broken bone, a close call, a man overboard pulled back at the last second, these moments are presented as evidence of the job's intensity. They are real, and they are part of what makes the show compelling. But cases like this shift the perspective. They force a closer look at what happens after the cameras stop. At what point does an injury move beyond the narrative of risk and into the realm of preventable harm? At what point does leadership, so often celebrated on screen, come under scrutiny in a courtroom? The lawsuit itself became one of several legal entanglements involving crew members and production entities connected to the show. Maritime law is complex, and cases can take years to resolve, often involving settlements, counterclaims, and jurisdictional challenges. The specifics of outcomes in such cases are not always fully public, especially when settlements are involved, but the fact that there is a lawsuit adds another layer to Hansen's story. The weight of reputation. For most people, reputation builds slowly. For Sig Hansen, it was forged under pressure, quite literally, out in the freezing, unpredictable waters of the Bering Sea, where a single mistake can cost lives. Over the course of nearly 2 decades on Deadliest Catch, Hansen's identity became something almost immovable. The captain who doesn't bend, the man who keeps control when everything else breaks apart. That image didn't come from fiction. It came from repetition. Season after season, year after year, audiences watched him command the F V Northwestern through storms that routinely pushed waves past 30 feet, in temperatures that dropped below freezing, in a profession where U.S. data has at times placed fatality rates above 100 deaths per 100,000 workers. This wasn't manufactured danger, it was real, and Hansen survived it again and again. That kind of consistency builds trust. Viewers didn't just watch Hansen, they believed in him. They believed in his judgment, his authority, his ability to make the right call when it mattered most. Over time, that belief became part of the show's foundation. You could put Hansen in chaos, and the expectation was simple: he would handle it. And for years, episode after episode, that expectation kept getting reinforced. There were seasons in the mid-2000s, early in the show's run, where the F V Northwestern pushed through storms that most vessels would have backed away from. Cameras captured 40-foot waves crashing over the bow, deckhands struggling to stay upright, and pots weighing over 700 pounds swinging violently across the deck. In those moments, Hansen's role wasn't dramatic. It was precise. He adjusted headings by degrees, timed movements between swells, and kept the vessel positioned just enough to avoid capsizing while still hauling gear. One wrong call in that environment could flip a boat, but it didn't. And this became part of his reputation. Then there were the mechanical failures. In multiple seasons, the Northwestern suffered engine issues, hydraulic breakdowns, and steering problems while still out in open water. In one instance, a loss of steering control forced Hansen to rely on limited maneuverability while waves continued to hit broadside, one of the most dangerous positions for any vessel. Instead of panicking, he slowed operations, stabilized the boat, and coordinated repairs while maintaining enough control to avoid rolling. It's the kind of situation where minutes matter and hesitation can escalate into disaster. Another defining pattern came from ice conditions, particularly during opilio crab seasons. Ice buildup on the deck and superstructure can add thousands of pounds of weight, raising a vessel's center of gravity and increasing the risk of capsizing. Episodes showed crew members chipping ice for hours, sometimes through the night, while Hansen monitored weight distribution and balance. He had to decide when to keep fishing and when to stop everything to prevent the boat from becoming top-heavy. Too much caution meant lost income. Too little meant real danger. Time and again he rode that line. There were also moments involving crew emergencies. Hansen has had to deal with injured deckhands, near misses with equipment, and exhaustion, pushing crew members to their limits. In one widely discussed incident, a crew member collapsed on deck, forcing Hansen to coordinate both immediate response and a plan for evacuation, all while still at sea. Those situations don't come with clear instructions. They require judgment under pressure, and the show repeatedly framed Hansen as someone who could make those calls quickly. Perhaps the most personal test came in 2016 when Hansen himself suffered a heart attack while filming. It didn't happen in a hospital or a controlled environment. It happened during the season while the work continued around him. He was eventually hospitalized, but what stood out to viewers was not just the medical emergency. It was how quickly he returned. Against medical advice, according to his own later statements, he pushed back into work, driven by the same mix of responsibility and pressure that defines the industry. It reinforced the image of someone who doesn't step away easily, even when the risk is internal. And then there are the smaller, less dramatic decisions. Choosing where to set pots when quotas are tight. Deciding whether to stay in a storm window for one more haul. Reading sonar and weather patterns to avoid dead zones or dangerous currents. These are the moments that don't look like survival on screen, but they are. Over time, they add up. They create a pattern where the absence of catastrophe becomes the story. That's what built the belief. Not one heroic act, but a sequence of them. Not luck, but repetition under pressure. Viewers saw Hansen make decisions in conditions where failure was always a possibility. And more often than not, those decisions worked. The boat stayed upright, the crew came back, the season continued. This is precisely why, when things later became complicated off-screen, that earlier image didn't just disappear. Because for years, in the most unforgiving conditions imaginable, the record showed something consistent. When chaos hit, he handled it, but reputation, especially one built in public, is not static. It is constantly tested, not just by what happens on screen, but by what happens outside of it. And that's where the weight begins to shift. Because alongside the career milestones, there exists another record. Individually, each of those events can be explained, contextualized, or defended. But collectively, they introduce friction. On television, Hansen is decisive, controlled, almost unshakable. In real life, there have been moments, documented ones, where that control has been questioned. a 2017 misdemeanor assault conviction, civil lawsuits involving crew disputes, and, perhaps most complex of all, decades-old allegations that resurfaced in court filings long after they were first investigated. None of these exist in the same category. Legally, his controversies are distinct and separate, some unresolved, some concluded, each with different levels of certainty. But in the public eye, those distinctions blur. They merge into a single, evolving perception, forcing audiences to reconcile two versions of the same man, the hardened captain and the figure tied to legal scrutiny. That tension is amplified by scale. Since its debut in 2005, Deadliest Catch has drawn millions of viewers per episode, with peak seasons reportedly averaging 2 to 3 million U.S. viewers weekly and global reach extending far beyond. Hansen has been a central figure for nearly 20 years, meaning his image isn't niche, it's widely recognized, repeatedly reinforced, and commercially valuable. Estimates place his net worth at around $3 to $4 million, built through fishing operations, television earnings, and related ventures. In high-performing seasons, captains in the Alaskan crab industry can generate hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars annually. That kind of visibility changes everything. Because when controversy enters the picture, it doesn't stay contained. Fans split. One side looks at the record and sees stability. No criminal conviction tied to the 1990s allegations, court findings that did not establish abuse, and a man who continues to work publicly without restriction. The other side sees a pattern, multiple legal issues over time, including a confirmed 2017 misdemeanor assault conviction, and asks different question about judgment and character. Neither side is operating without facts, but they are interpreting them differently. And in today's media environment, that gap expands. Real events become raw material. A civil lawsuit becomes evidence of wrongdoing. A misdemeanor becomes a symbol of something larger. And then, layered on top, come viral videos, conspiracy-style content, claims of government seizures or mysterious discoveries aboard the F V Northwestern. None of those claims is supported by evidence from the U.S. Coast Guard, the Discovery Channel, or any credible reporting. Yet they spread precisely because they attach themselves to an already complex story. That's where the real risk lies. Because reputation at this level is economic. A career spanning 2 decades, a television brand reaching millions, future opportunities tied to continued public trust. Everything can be affected. Everything depends on perception holding steady, and perception is fragile. Hansen remains active. He still captains the Northwestern. He still appears on television. But the equation has changed. It is no longer just about surviving storms. It's about navigating scrutiny, where facts, interpretations, and misinformation collide. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the